Well, good afternoon and happy spring. Welcome to our workshop today. We have clinical psychologist Deniz Keskinel joining us from San Francisco. I'm Feri Nase, founder and the CEO of Me Time Healing. This is our third spring workshop, and I welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us and being here and wanting to learn a little bit about change, how to cope with change, especially during these times that we are going through politically, economically, psychologically. Everybody's kind of going through some rough times. But it is part of life, the ebbs and flows of life. And here we have dearest Deniz to give us some coping mechanisms and some guidance to how to manage through these rough waters. Welcome, Deniz. Thank you so much for joining us today. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Farah. Thank you for having me. Hi, everyone. So my name is Deniz. I'm a clinical psychologist and also a researcher at Stanford. And today I'm here to talk about how to cope with change and uncertainty with you. The last workshop that we had was we went kind of over how to build resilience. So this workshop is a little bit building on that subject, I think. Resilience is important to be able to cope with change and uncertainty in life that we all go through at various stages in different areas. So we're a small group, so I would love for you to, if you feel comfortable, to open your microphone and, ask questions or reflect with me and talk if you want to and share your experiences. But even if you don't want to, I would just like you to reflect on is if there's a life change or uncertainty that you've dealt with recently, or maybe you're dealing with now, or that's kind of coming up. Sometimes we know that change is coming, and sometimes it kind of tends to come out of nowhere. Yeah. Whether sometimes it's change that we choose, and sometimes it kind of just tends to happen to us. Whichever the case is, change tends to be a constant and an inevitable part of life. And it's quite universal. In many different cultures can go through change and uncertainty in different ways, although every culture goes through it, right? And it can be an exciting thing based on what that change is, or it can be destabilizing. And change can be quite familiar for certain cultures, something that maybe they go through quite often, or it could be more foreign and something that cultures don't really experience too much. And it can happen in various areas of our lives, right? Change can happen in our relationships, and change can be both positive and negative. So, and both brings with it uncertainty, and both can be tough to go through. So I'm not just talking about, negative change, but positive change is also not easy to go through. It can be about, relationships, starting one, going through divorce or a breakup. It can be in our careers, it can be an organization going through change, or it could be us, facing job uncertainty or starting a new job. It can be, especially for multicultural people, it could be moving to a new place, changing cities, starting a new life. It could be about our health, maybe facing an uncertain diagnosis, or learning about a new diagnosis that's going to change our lives, or about world events that I think we can all relate to. I think, both US and also Turkey is going through changes right now, and politically, economically, and that's also a change that we go through, I think, as a group. And thank you for sharing, Ijla, in the group chat. And I encourage you all to share. And I'm sorry to hear about your dog. And it's really hard, and it's a big change, losing a pet, losing a dog. Um, and it's really, I think, loss is one of the biggest and the hardest changes that we have to cope with in life. So why is change and uncertainty so challenging to us? So I would like to show just a quick video of how our minds evolved to keep us safe and kind of explain maybe sometimes where our stress and our anxiety comes from. Um,
The human mind has evolved.
are you able to see my screen, the video?
Yes.
Yes? Okay. All right.
To think in such a way that it naturally creates psychological suffering. You see, back in the Stone Age, 200,000 years ago, life was pretty dangerous for our caveman ancestors. So if a caveman or cavewoman wanted to survive, their minds had to constantly be on the lookout for things that might hurt or harm them. And if that cave person's mind wasn't good at predicting, spotting, or avoiding danger, what happened to her? The default setting of the caveman mind was safety first. And we in the modern world have inherited this. Our modern minds are constantly warning us of things that might hurt or harm us. The caveman mind says, watch out, there might be a bear in that cave. You could get eaten. Watch out, that shadow on the horizon might be an enemy from another clan. You could get speared. Our modern mind then does worrying, predicting the worst, avoiding anything that scares you, anxiety in all of its different forms. Back in caveman day,
Stop it there. Go back to the presentation. Yeah, any ideas, any thoughts about that? As you can see, our minds don't like change and uncertainty because it's trying to keep us safe all the time, right? There we go. So evolutionarily, we've evolved for survival, right? Our brains are wired for survival. So we try to predict and plan for future threats all the time. But when there's change happening, which brings with it uncertainty, our brain can't plan, right? It doesn't know if something good is around the corner or if there's a bear around the corner there to eat us. If we don't know what's around the corner, our brains are going to try and predict the worst case scenario to keep us safe. But then when it does that, it triggers a threat response to keep us safe, right? So which creates anxiety and stress for us to be able to fight or flight. And it tries to gather more information to reduce uncertainty, which can lead us to worry, to ruminate, and fill in the blanks, predict what's going to happen. And we tend to overestimate threat and underestimate our ability to cope. Again, to get ready for what's going to happen, because we don't know what's going to happen. So that's why human beings tend to have a bit of a fear of the unknown. And we prefer predictability and control because familiar things tend to be safe. Eric from is a psychologist that I quite like, and he said there's nothing more unbearable for man to be in a state of complete uncertainty. People will give up their freedom and prefer known unhappiness over the satisfaction of an unknown possibility because it triggers a very primal fear. So it can also lead us to, kind of resist change sometimes. And when we, for example, go through loss, this is when the bargaining stage happens and the denial stage of us not wanting to come to terms with what's happening. And it can also lead us to not make a change that's coming, that maybe we need to, or that would make us actually happier in the long term. But change is risky, right? We don't know what it's going to bring. And they've done, for example, experiments with rats when, they give a certain group of rats shocks in regular intervals. So the rat knows when it's going to get the shock versus a rat that gets the shock at irregular intervals. And they've done this with individuals as well, where they tell one of them, we're definitely getting a little shock. And then they tell the second group, you have a 50% of getting a little shock. And of course, the group that doesn't know when it's going to get it, or the group that's been told you have a 50% chance of getting it, has higher levels of stress and anxiety because of that uncertainty. So the uncertainty part can bring with it can be a barrier to decision making. And so we can be kind of paralyzed about making a choice about certain things. And it can also lead to learned helplessness, where if enough times, we feel powerless, we can stop trying to change and avoid taking options. So as human beings, we like being in control and we like knowing, and we've created a lot of systems in place for that as well. So when that anxiety and that stress happens, our brains tend to be in overdrive. We tend to be hyper vigilant and focus on threats. Again, our brain is trying to keep us safe. We tend to have anxious thought patterns, trying to predict the future. And, worrying also gives us a sense of control when control has been taken from us. So it's like our brains I'm doing something, I'm maybe catching the threat by worrying. We have reduced emotion regulation and coping abilities, and we have usually reactive responses in decision making, because also when we're tired, that more emotional side of our brain is the one leading, and it can make bad decisions or more anxiety-based decisions. So what comes to your mind when you think about change and uncertainty? Any kind of emotions or responses, or maybe events, if you'd like to share in the chat, or just feel free to speak up. I think change, yes, definitely. Political uncertainty was also one of the things on my mind when I was preparing this workshop. I would say I think a lot of people around the world are going through political uncertainty at the moment, and it can bring a lot of emotions with it, right? Anxiety, fear, stress. It can be excitement, depending on what the change is, anger, sadness. I think another one I thought of after was loneliness. Change can feel lonely as well. It's like we're the only ones going through it. And when we feel, especially, the stress and anxiety, we tend to behave in certain ways. We usually want to avoid an escape, right? And I think we can group kind of broadly in people into 3 behaviors in response to change. It's like we avoid, we put off decisions, we procrastinate, we ignore the change, hoping that it's going to go away. We kind of like approach it passively, withdraw. Some people over control, or try to control everything, try to plan everything perfectly, micromanage, kind of get obsessive about little things, and create certain rigidities in their lives. Again, gaining a sense of control feels good. And some people act in impulsive ways. They, rush into big decisions, act in risky behavior. They tend to react and be emotional. And people also resist, and it could also go under avoidance or impulsivity. It's like push back. You can push back by kind of avoiding or get angry, try to cling to old ways, get defensive, again, kind of not coming to terms with the fact that change is happening. And we often, in life in general, we can react a lot of the times without realizing it. So I'm curious, which do you relate to the most when you think about, and of course, acceptance is one as well that, we would like to get to. But if you notice one of these patterns in yourself, which one would you relate to the most? And maybe it's like that first reaction that you give to change, which of course, acceptance, it takes time to get to that stage. So we can, a couple of examples of it would be maybe there's a looming divorce or a breakup, and you avoid the difficult conversations and pretend that everything is fine and it's just going to go away if you avoid it. Over control is maybe you have a kid going to college and you obsessively plan your last weeks together and maybe their college experience, or maybe you plan like every vacation that's going to come up. It's like, okay, Thanksgiving, we're going to do this, Christmas, try to over control the change that's happening. Impulsivity, for example, there's a new government in place and you suddenly start interviewing for new jobs across the world and you decide, okay, I'm just gonna move out of this country and go somewhere new across the world. And yeah, as long as that, of course, response is made in an intentional way, it's not necessarily all, negative. And different cultures approach change and uncertainty in different ways, right? So Hofstede has these cultural dimensions, and one of the cultural dimensions he talks about is uncertainty avoidance. So to what degree different cultures avoid uncertainty in their lives. So let's start with collectivistic cultures. We're thinking, more Latin American, Eastern, like Middle Eastern, Asian, Mediterranean cultures, generalizing. And they tend to have high uncertainty avoidance. So they have a discomfort with ambiguity and change, and they usually tend to have an aversion to risk, and they prefer strong social norms, family ties, and traditions. So they tend to resist sudden changes and they really value systems over innovation, and mistakes are not as tolerized. And at first, when I was looking into this, it kind of sounded counterintuitive to me because collectivistic cultures tend to face more political, economical chaos and upheaval and a lot more uncertainty in life. And they don't really walk on stable ground. Then the more you think about it, is that because their external world is so much more chaotic, they need tighter and more stable structures internally to feel some sort of control. So, they need to kind of defer to authority. They need, like, they can't afford change and ambiguity in that moment because their external world is unstable. And yeah, they need that stability and structure to get through that change. Versus individualistic cultures, we're thinking more North America, Western Europe. They tend to be more, they have low uncertainty avoidance. So they have more tolerance for ambiguity and change. They tend to take more risks and adapt quicker to change. They can experiment, make mistakes, and they value individuality over family ties. And because they have more access to resources and they can afford to be more relaxed about uncertainty. And it makes sense when you think about it that way. So we've talked about, the difficulties of change and uncertainty a bit. So let's move on to coping strategies. So how do we cope with change and uncertainty when it happens? Some of these concepts I talked a bit during my building resilience workshop, but I think having a growth mindset is an important one. Trying to make meaning out of change and seeing change as an opportunity for growth. So focusing on opportunities and potential benefits that it can bring. Again, this, depends on the change itself. But having a flexible and an adaptable mindset, flexibility in your thinking. And I think multicultural people are very good at flexibility and adaptability and, seeing how can I grow out of this change. And if it's loss that we're talking about, of course, that's not the first thing your brain is going to go to, and it's going to take time. First have to, and we'll get to that later as well, kind of, sit with your emotions and process your emotions. But then it's good to think about, how can I look at this differently instead of just focusing on what was lost. And self-care, taking care of your physical and your mental health, sleeping well, eating well, working out. These are the things that always get us through anything in life. Taking care of ourselves is always very important. Practicing gratitude, social sports, and reaching out to family, your community, your friends, and asking for their support during these times. Self-compassion, showing yourself some kindness for what you're going through, because change is never easy. And knowing that you're not alone in your suffering, even though it might feel lonely at times, but you have people, and there are people that have been through something similar to you, whether it's loss or whether it's, I think, what we're going through in certain countries, we're going through it all together, right? And I think it's a comforting idea to know that we're not alone in it. And I think just going off of that, limiting exposure to news, especially at certain times, for example, before bedtime, it's good to be informed, but sometimes when you go into the little nits and the grits and the little details of it can get too much. So kind of knowing yourself, creating certain boundaries, I think, around news can be a healthy thing. So coping strategies, again, can change between cultures as well, right? Collectivistic cultures, change is a big decision. It happens slowly because they have to, thank you for sharing in the chat also. I was try to decide their college. Changes can happen as a family as well. And if your kids are going to college, that's also the loss of a certain kind of life you had together in the house, right? And what's going to happen for their college, and the family dynamic is of course going to change. That's also a certain loss. And it's definitely true that I think it's always nice. It gives me a lot of comfort as well, knowing that I'm not alone in a change or uncertainty that I'm going through, and that everybody goes through it in different ways. It's something we can all relate to. And so in collectivistic cultures, change is a big decision. It happens slowly. You have to talk to your elders about it. It's a group event usually, and they find comfort in community and family support, and they rely on tradition, and they find comfort in rituals. Whereas in individualistic cultures, when you're going through change and you think about coping strategy, change is seen as a self-growth and a personal journey, self-actualization. It's a growth, it's a challenge, right? It's more encouraged. And as a coping mechanism, what's encouraged is self-soothing, self-care. Again, like the individual is highlighted, right? Even the word self-care is a very Western word, I think. And I think, a challenge to that could be especially the feeling of loneliness that might show up. I think thinking that they might be lonely in this change. And they can go through more trial and error. Think about, for example, someone losing their job. Maybe someone coming from a collectivistic culture might network in their community, or while trying to find something new, they turn back to their traditional roles, go back to their family, maybe go back to their family business. I've seen this, from like people back in Turkey, a lot of the times go back to family jobs. Whereas maybe someone that loses their job from an individualistic culture, they'll go solo networking, or they'll think, okay, maybe I'll pivot to careers, try a new industry. There's more room for that trial and error, and they're on that journey a bit more by themselves.
We have
Oh, yeah.
three comments, Deniz.
Hmm?
We have 3 comments.
Oh, yeah. Let me see. Great. Data growth mindset that was mentioned. Yeah, definitely. I really like the growth mindset, which was a concept that Carol Dweck kind of coined. And instead of focusing on the setbacks and the more negative side of what's happening, it's, you change your perspective and think, how can this help me grow? And how can this help me get to where I want to, and how can this be an opportunity? And I think it definitely helps a lot with stress. Yeah, I saw the other 2 comments earlier. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, growing up, maybe if you have any reflections, can you remember how you were taught to deal with uncertainty and big life changes? Something that you've noticed in your culture, especially, yeah, how we see people deal with it around us also affects how we tend to deal with change later in life. And yeah, continuing with the coping strategies, I think one important coping strategy, I think first and foremost, is grieving. And whether it's an actual loss that you've had, losing someone, losing your pet, your cat or your dog, or it can be losing a certain life you've had, your kids going off to college. It's still a loss. It's still, you're leaving behind a life that you had with them in the house. And things are going to change. It's going to look different, right? And we don't tend to think of these other things as loss. But they are. Losing a job or facing that uncertainty. It's again like losing a certain part of your either identity, or things are going to look different now. You're moving to a new city, going through that transition, your life in that city, you're leaving that behind. Going through again, a breakup or a divorce, having a new government in place, that the old government and the old idea of what your country looked like, we've left that behind, right? And there's a new reality now. And all of this is loss. So it's important to grieve what we're leaving behind. And these tend to be hidden losses. So these hidden losses, because we don't usually recognize them as loss, so they can lead to unresolved grief a lot of the times. And they can kind of like pop up in ways that we don't really, and we don't really notice it. So it's important to recognize and name the grief and name what you're going through and to mourn it and come with time to accept the loss. And one thing that I like doing is writing a letter to your loss. Whether, it's your dog or that old life that you've had, that old identity, it's important to say your goodbye and also to write about what you appreciated about that and just everything. And so you've probably heard of these 5 stages of grief by Kubler-Ross when it comes to grief. And it's not a linear type of progression. We go through different emotions. Some emotions maybe we live through more than the others, depending. But we can go through something similar when it comes to change and going through denial that it's not happening. Maybe we resist, we try to cling to ways, we get angry. Why is this happening to me? And bargaining, try to, keep that loss or the old way. Maybe get depressed and go through depression and sadness, and hopefully with time come to acceptance. And again, bargaining is also one of the ways we try to regain control over something that happened to us that wasn't in our control, which is, again, one of the hardest things to go through as a human being. Another coping strategy I think is important is having some routine and trying to gain control over the things that we can. So when we're going through change, it's important to create or stick to a certain routine that you have and create some sort of a stability. Look for certain constants in life. If you've had a close friend that's been supporting you, continue calling that close friend. If you have a favorite meal that you make, continue, making that at regular intervals. If you had some sort of a routine during your week of, working out or cooking, sticking to these routines are very, very important. And finding some grounding comforts for yourself, and focusing on what you can control. And I've seen this a lot with kids also when families move to a new city, for example. It's a big thing that's happened to the kid. The kid is left behind his friends, his life, his house, everything. And when they move, it's like such a big thing that happens out of the kid's control that they tend to lash out and act out a lot of the times. And one trick is giving the kid a bit of a sense of control. For example, if you're going for a weekend trip somewhere, or you're trying to decide what you're going to do on a Sunday, giving the kid options like, do you want to go, hiking today, or do you want to go to the park today? And even giving that little sense of control to the kid over choosing what he wants to do that Sunday can feel really good. So try to do that for, your kids and also for yourself. But try to give yourself some sort of a control over the things that you can. And focus on the short term. Take it day by day. And instead of thinking, what is going to happen in, 2 years, 5 years, try to take it day by day. Focus on the short term, what you can do in the short term, and try to break down tasks into more manageable chunks. And hopefully come to acceptance slowly. And acceptance of the situation and the things that you can't control. Noticing your thought patterns if your brain is trying to predict what's going to happen. Maybe it's predicting the worst case. Maybe it's ruminating. Maybe it's going over what's happened or what's happening over and over. Maybe it's kind of stuck and yeah, trying to understand what's happening better by just thinking about it all the time. Maybe it's thinking in black and white. Whatever it is, just notice what your mind is doing and approach it in a curious way. Try not to judge your mind for what it's doing, because as I said at the beginning, your mind is doing all of these things only to protect you, only because change and uncertainty is scary for your mind, and it's trying to keep you safe and alive. And acknowledge your emotions, what you're feeling. And it can be different feelings at the same time. Some change can be exciting and scary at the same time, and both can coexist, right? But just name that fear. And there are 4 A's of acceptance, especially when it comes to emotions. We're first acknowledging our emotions. Okay, I have some fear around this change. I have some sadness around this change. Allow that sadness and that fear to be. And taking it one step further, instead of just allowing, accommodating that feeling, making some room for it, knowing that it's there, not because it wants to make life hell for you, but it's there for a reason. It's trying to protect you. These emotions that we label as negative, they all have a purpose. And again, taking it another step further, actually appreciating that it's there, which is not easy to do, of course, and it takes time to get here. And I think mindfulness can be one of the very helpful methods for doing that. And after this, I think choosing your response and your behavior based on values is what's important. Controlling what you can and trying to live your life with the things that you can control in ways that are in line with who you want to be, and that's in line with the life that you want to live. So, we first kind of think about the personal life domains, health and personal growth, and that can include, religion and spirituality in it as well, relationships, family, community, friends, co-workers, career/education, and leisure, things you like to do for fun and play. And whatever's happened in whichever domain of your life, I think it's important that you feed all of these different domains, so that when one thing happens, you still have these others that are supporting you and continue living true to your values in these other areas, which is what you can control. And of course, recognizing that these personal life domains exist within the larger environment, and within the macro system that includes our community and society, that includes our country, that economy, the political climate, the culture, the external systems that maybe we can't control as much. So we exist within that, of course. So I think within our personal life, it's important to try and control what we can, and still stay true to who we are. Do we have time for a bit of a mindfulness meditation? Do you think, Ferianam?
Yes, we do.
Yeah. Okay, so I have an interesting, my meditation that I would like to bring you guys through, if everybody is open to it. hopefully. It's this mountain meditation by John Kabat-Zinn, who's a big name in the mindfulness meditation field, and he's founded mindfulness-based stress reduction. And so I think it'll be a good one to go through for dealing with change and uncertainty. So yeah, if everybody can just, I'm imagining that everybody is sitting down. If not, it'd be great if you can, yeah, sit on a chair or on the floor in a comfortable position. And if you feel comfortable, slowly close your eyes and find a position of stability with your spine upright. Arms hanging. Bring your awareness slowly to your breath. Feeling each breath as you breathe in and out. Letting it be just as it is, without trying to change or regulate it in any way. Allowing it to flow easy and naturally with its own pace and with its own rhythm. Without trying to control it. Allowing the body to be still and with a sense of being complete, whole, with your posture reflecting this sense of resolve and wholeness. And as you're sitting, I want you to slowly let an image form in your mind's eye. And even if it's not a visual image, just the sensation of it, I want you to imagine the most magnificent or beautiful mountain that you know, have seen, or can imagine. And let it gradually come into greater focus. The sense of this mountain and feeling its overall shape, its peak high in the sky, its large base rooted in Earth's crust, and its steep or gentle sloping sides. Notice how massive it is, how grand, how unmoving and beautiful. Maybe your mountain has some snow on it on the top. Maybe trees reaching down to base. Maybe there's some streams, maybe some animals or not. Observing the mountain. It's your mountain, noting its qualities. And when you're ready, see if you can bring the mountain into your own body, sitting, so that your body and the mountain in your mind's eye become one as you sit there. And you're sharing in the massiveness and the stillness and the majesty of the mountain. And you become the mountain. And you're grounded on where you're sitting, on the chair. Your head becomes the peak, supported by the rest of the body. You're sitting there, becoming aware of the fact that the sun travels across the sky and the weather is changing around you. The light, the colors, changing moment by moment, day by day, season by season. But the mountain remains still. Maybe there's melting snow, waterfalls. Sometimes there's the warm sun. And sometimes there's the cold night. Sometimes there's cold rain or sweet snow falling down. Spring comes and flowers bloom. And fall comes and colors all change. And through it all, the weather's changing, seasons are changing. The mountain just sits and experiences change in each moment. And there's constant change around it. Yet the mountain is always just being itself. And it's still as beautiful, as majestic, and as grand. unmoved by the weather and what's happening around it. And in the same way as we're sitting in this meditation, we can learn to experience this mountain and embody the same stillness and same groundedness in the face of everything that changes in our own lives. Through our own periods of light and darkness, of activity and inactivity, through our own bright or more dull colors. Own storms. And our own warmth. You can still feel grounded. And slowly bring your attention back to your breath. Again, let your breath flow naturally. Focus on your chest, expanding, contracting. And when you're ready, slowly open your eyes. Come back to the room. Do a little stretch. Yeah, I'm curious what that was like, if anybody has any reflections.
That felt good. I feel more grounded.
Okay, good. Yeah, well, thank you everyone for kind of entertaining going through that interesting meditation there. I think, yeah, I thought it would be a good one for in the face of change and uncertainty, just, embodying that stillness of a mountain and how, yeah, just kind of remain still throughout any kind of weather or change happening around it. And that groundedness that you can find within yourself can always be a good tool in face of change and uncertainty. So I know that we're almost done, and there's not much left in my slides. This was kind of one of the last things I wanted to do anyways, but is kind of a couple of proverbs that I found from different cultures. The first one is a Japanese one: the bamboo that bends is stronger than the oak that resists. Apparently, this too shall pass is one that we've heard a lot. I didn't know it was a Persian one. And the last one is a Chinese proverb: when the winds of change blow, Some build walls and others build windmills. And just kind of finishing off with, just 2 book recommendations that I had that you could check out. The first one, Pema Chodron, she comes from a Buddhist tradition, and she is a very wise woman. Her book, Living Beautifully with Uncertainty and Change. And I think Viktor Frankl can always be relevant in many different contexts, but just talks about his experiences at the camps. Just talks about how to find meaning in the midst of suffering. And yeah, I think just leaving this workshop, we get to think about which resources you would like to use more in the future when you go through change, which certainly you will, I will, it's a long constant of life. And thank you for being here and listening. And yeah.
Thank you, Deniz. Thank you so much. I think everybody learned a thing or two. Hopefully we can remember it all, but it was very helpful. Thank you everyone for bringing your curious minds. Hopefully we're gonna have another workshop on April 22nd, which is the Earth Day, and that's gonna be on mindfulness. So we will continue on the same theme that Deniz touched today, finding the right tools of healing with more mindful and through growth mindset, and finding our own ways of resilience at the end of the day. And again, thank you so much, Deniz, and thank you everyone for being here, listening to Deniz's great ideas, and we like to see you again. Hope to see you soon.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Everyone.
Take care.
Too.